Don't leave your podcast's future to chance. Watch out for these legal landmines in podcast team collaborations. That's what's in store for you in this episode, so let's get to it. Welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and today we're diving into some legal landmines that come up in podcast team collaborations and the case for using good, solid contracts. Whether you're just starting out or you've been podcasting for years, understanding the kinds of legal troubles that can hit you when you're working with a team of collaborators and contractors is essential. And what you're going to learn now can save you a lot of headaches down the line. In this episode, we're going to talk about copyright ownership, joint works, works made for hire, and most importantly, how to ensure that you own and control your show the way you want to. And I've got a real-life case study that perfectly illustrates why having a solid contract is absolutely essential. So let's just jump right in and get started. Copyright authorship and ownership. Well, first let's talk about this. In the world of podcasting, understanding who owns what can get pretty complicated, especially when multiple people are involved. So let's break it down. Copyright ownership comes from authorship. That means that the person who creates the content, whether it's the script, the audio recording, or even the music that's used in it, is the one who holds the copyright. Now, this might sound really straightforward, but it gets really tricky when you have multiple contributors. For instance, if you have a co-host or a guest who helps you create the content, well, who owns that copyright? Without a clear agreement, it can be a real gray area. Generally, if someone contributes creatively to the content, they could have a claim to authorship and therefore a claim to owning the copyright in the material that's been jointly created. And that intention is usually presumed under the law unless there's persuasive evidence of a different intention of the parties. So you want to have that intention clearly expressed, preferably in some written form, so that the outside observer, the judge, the jury, whatever, can look at it and see what you intended at the time you started the process together. Now, let's talk about independent contractors next, because often podcasters hire contractors to help with various aspects of their show, like editing, producing, or even guest appearances. And that is great. I mean, you can't do everything alone all the time. That's a recipe for burnout and disappointment and slow progress. But here's a key point. Excuse me. An independent contractor is typically considered to be the author of their contributions unless there's a written agreement stating otherwise. And that written agreement has to use some sort of magic language, magic copyright language. This means that unless you have a contract in writing that specifies that the work done by the contractor is a work made for hire, the contractor retains the copyright to their work. And that could lead to issues down the line, especially if you want to use the content in ways that weren't initially discussed. So it's really crucial to have clear contracts that outline who owns what's being created by those independent contractors and make sure those contracts use that magic language I'm talking about. Now, next up is joint works. A joint work is what's created when two or more authors intend their contributions to be merged into inseparable or independent parts of a unitary whole. In podcasting, this often happens naturally with co-hosts or collaborative content creation, but the legal implications can be pretty significant. Each co-author in a joint work has equal rights to use and license and monetize and all those kinds of things relating to the work, which means that one co-host could potentially make decisions about the content without the other's consent or agreement. So unless there's an agreement that says otherwise, that could be a problem. This can lead to conflicts if there isn't a clear understanding and documentation of each party's rights and intentions from the very beginning. Now let's move on to a little bit more about those works made for hire I mentioned earlier. Remember that magic language, work made for hire, is a legal term that refers to content created by an employee as part of their job, or certain types of commissioned works where the parties agree in writing that the work will be a work made for hire. So for podcasters, this will apply automatically to content created by hired editors, producers, or co-hosts if they are working as essentially bona fide employees with payroll and deductions and insurance and all those kinds of things. The advantage of work made for hire is that the employer or the person hiring the employee owns the copyright from the outset. And as I said, this happens sort of automatically for actual employees where creating the content is part of their normal job duties. But for independent contractors, it's different. In those cases, you have to have that written contract. It has to fit into certain categories, which fortunately podcasts qualify as audiovisual works. So the magic language, though, has to be in a written contract. It's essential that you have a clear written contract specifying that the work is work made for hire. Otherwise, the creator might end up retaining all or some of the copyright. So how do you ensure that you own and control your show the way you want to? Well, here are a few practical steps. First, use written contracts. As I've been saying, I'm preaching here. Always use written contracts, written agreements with everyone involved in your podcast, from co-hosts to co-producers to independent contractors. You want to clearly outline the scope of the work, what they're going to receive as compensation, if anything, and most importantly, who owns the output, the copyright and the brand and all the results and proceeds. Number 2, specify that it's work for hire. Ensure that your contracts include this magic language. That way, you'll retain copyright ownership right from the beginning. Clarify things. If you're collaborating with others, make sure to clarify and document each person's contributions and ownership rights. This will prevent misunderstandings and conflicts down the road. Now, if you want to own it all jointly, that's great. It's important then to specify, who's going to be responsible for managing things and what licensing is authorized and those kinds of things. But that can easily be managed in some form of a podcast prenup kind of a document. But the point is you want to have it in writing so that everybody's on the same page, and that third party neutral observer who gets called in to decide things later on, if there's a dispute, the judge or the jury or the arbitrator, they need to be able to figure out what was supposed to happen before they can figure out who's supposed to win or get what, right? All right, number 4, regularly review your contracts. As your podcast evolves, the roles and contributions of the people you're working with will probably change and evolve. So you want to look at and update those contracts and reflect the changes. I'd say at least once a year, at least have a look at that. And by following these steps, you really can protect your interests and maintain control over your podcast. Now, collaboration can often feel like a partnership, and legally, it can be considered one by default law in most states. When you and another person work together on a project, a podcast in this instance, you are entering into a kind of partnership, whether it's been formalized or not. Without these clear agreements that I've been talking about, you might face some legal complications similar to those in business partnerships, disputes over control or profit sharing or decision making. So it's essential that you treat your podcast collaboration with the same seriousness as you would any other business partnership. Document the roles and the responsibilities and the rights of the parties really thoroughly. By now, I'm betting you can guess my advice. Always get these things in writing, so there can be no misunderstandings. Now, here's that case study that I teased at the beginning of the show. Let's illustrate these points with this real-life example of a client of mine who had started a podcast network, built it around a successful show, had some co-hosts over time, and then the latest of the co-hosts sort of became the main voice of the show. But when it came time to monetize the show, the co-host and the founding host disagreed on the approach. One wanted to do advertising, the other wanted to do Patreon and sort of operate like a membership. Well, trying to be magnanimous, the founder told the host in a text, hey, look, it's your show, we'll do it your way. And unfortunately, what this led to was the co-host attempting to take over the entire show, and what's more, to move it to a new network and exclude the founder. This situation really could have been avoided altogether if there had been a simple prenup kind of an agreement in the form of a written co-host engagement agreement or something. A well-drafted document could have clearly outlined ownership, control, decision-making processes, revenue sharing, preventing the co-host from unilaterally claiming this kind of ownership. So, what can you learn from this case study? Well, a few more practical tips. Document everything in clear written agreements from the start: roles, ownership, decision making, shares of revenue. Seek legal advice. Consult with a legal professional to ensure that your contracts cover all the bases. This will save you from disputes and potential litigation, and frankly, it's just going to let you sleep better at night. Make sure in your communication that all the parties understand the terms of the agreement and their roles, rights, and responsibilities within the podcast venture. And again, revisit the show, the agreements. As the show grows and evolves, take another look back and make sure that things are still the way you intend them to be. If you take these steps, you can protect your podcast from all kinds of legal landmines. Now, don't leave your podcast's future to chance. Visit podcastlawforms.com today and get, I need to find the, nope, it's not working. There it is. Don't leave your podcast future to chance. Visit podcastlawforms.com today, and you can get the co-host and independent contractor kinds of forms that you need in order to avoid major problems with your show. Protect your hard work, ensure your show's success by securing the right legal agreements. So to wrap up, remember, podcasting is a creative, it's a collaborative endeavor, and it involves working with lots of people. It involves legal complexities that you really do need to address from the outset. Treat things like a business. Contracts are not just formalities, they are essential tools to protect your interests and ensure smooth collaborations. So thanks today for tuning in to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. And until next time, keep your podcasting dreams alive and legally sound.